having the jail episode and then having the school episode, it felt like the school is a jail too, you know?
We have talked about this often. No, we have talked about the
Yeah.
idea of what if our like we have a support group for our fathers.
I get worried when child actors are really good in films because I'm like, how much of this are you imbibing?
That kind of emotional safety is also so overwhelming for men when they get it right.
And I am not able to do it.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that I'm having. I'm unable to be tender with my friends who are men.
The brilliant line was in Jojo Rabbit, where sort of, I think she tells like the mother or like the other girl tells him, "You're not a Nazi, Jojo. You're just a 9-year-old boy who wanted to join a club." Okay, welcome to another episode of In Their Shoes. This is Aniket.
This is Karan.
Yes. So, In Their Shoes essentially is a podcast where we deep dive into different characters from films, TV series, and try to find out the ways in which we can connect with them and sort of experience the world from their point of view. And in that sense, Adolescence, the series which is out on Netflix right now, felt like one of the most urgent and important characters that we need to kind of get into the shoes of and talk about. So here we are doing that. And so we were thinking about how to go about it, right? Like there are a lot of people, because the series has become so popular and it is stirring up so many important conversations, and rightfully so. There are so many people who have been talking about it, right? Like in the Indian context, Nikhil Taneja, who does a lot of work on ground with universities, with young youth of the country, and all that. He has put up a brilliant Instagram post about writing about all these issues. We'll link that up. Paromita Vora, who's a documentarian, sort of been a very important cultural writer. She's writing, and she's also put out a blog on it. Uh, uh, the Hollywood Reporter has done a collection of like the voices of the film, sort of an article about all the filmmakers talking about why a film like or a series like that cannot be made in India today. Like it's talking about it from a commercial perspective. So we'll link all of that in the show notes. But why I'm talking about that is like that brings us to us, right? Like we were talking, oh, what can we add to the discussion in the context of how we go about and approach In Their Shoes. And thereby we felt like the episode 3 of the series, which is one of the most popular episodes, but also kind of dives into straight away understanding of this character who has committed this horrible crime, who's a young boy, a 13-year-old. And
Yeah.
we felt we could sort of dissect that episode and kind of talk about the character from that perspective. So we will do that. But before we kind of get into that, first thoughts, Karan?
It's been really cool to watch a show catch fire like that because I feel like lately the thing that catches fire is usually a negative thing, like anything that's bad gets a lot of kind of central focus on us on social media platforms. So it's been cool to have like a show that was good, that everyone loved, um, be so kind of the center of attention that it deserves. Like it feels like it's become the show of the year already, which is really interesting and really cool. And I think for reasons beyond just the fact that it's like a one shot thing, there are no cuts, beyond just look at this child actor and how amazing the child actor is. It just seems to be one of the most relevant stories of our time. We're constantly looking for pieces of media that will be relevant to this decade or this era of like content creation or filmmaking or whatever. And this feels like that cornerstone piece that we can look back to and be like, yeah, that defined the 2020s.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
such a important point, man. Like why this is a breakthrough moment, or like a breakthrough piece of series, is because it's also on a very mainstream platform that generally greenlights like kind of say pandering content, or you're right,
Yeah.
like it's something which is not a negative thing, is not taking a centerpiece, which in the Indian context, a movie about young teenage, we were just talking about it, right? Like a movie about young
Yeah.
teenage people, which is also about adolescence, like that took up the mainstream dialogue and conversation, and after a point of time it just became like not constructive. And like, so it's very good that this movie is coming through. So kind of getting into that right away, like, the way this, what hooked me on also, like, the way the series starts itself,
Yeah.
like, there's like a bunch of vehicles of cops kind of getting into a house, and a raid is happening inside a house. It's almost like, what came to my mind was like, how special forces might have gone into Osama bin Laden's house and broken in, like,
Mm.
and kind of tried to cap, it's like a big terrorist is being caught, right?
Yeah.
And then all of that comes down to, like like there are various interviews of the filmmakers online, and Jack Thorne and like Philip Bartini, who's directed the show. Jack Thorne has written it along with Stephen Graham. They have talked about, in
Mm.
the first moments you almost feel like, oh, it's the adult, it's the father who might have done something wrong, and he also feels that as he's getting down. But slowly you reveal that actually all these cops, all these vehicles, this army of cops has come to kind of catch this 13-year-old boy for
Yeah.
a murder of a young girl of the same age. And
Yeah.
that is, from that point of on, the filmmaking of it, which is not just stylistic for the heck of it, but really servicing the story for what they are trying
Yeah.
to tell, and like it's really gripping and visceral to that point. It kind of just hooks you on, and like thereby, like, and then the story becomes about, not the, like, which the writers have talked about. They didn't want to do a whodunit. They right
Mm.
away tell you, like, we are like, yes, we, like, spoiler alerts for this entire discussion that we are going to have, but that's no spoiler. Like, that thing is already told out there in the first episode. And from there on it becomes about like really trying to understand why, how we have
Yeah.
failed as a society, or what have we done so that, an event like that this has occurred. And
Yeah.
which I find like the power of storytelling is like, School of Life, which is run by Alan D. Botton. They have put out a beautiful blog, which we'll also link in the show notes. They put out a blog of in how to love, right? And they
Mm.
put out like steps about that. And they said the task of a lover is to go beyond the headline. Like they say,
Yeah.
oftentimes as a society, we are catering to the, like, we are pandering towards the headline, right? Oh, so and so owner of a company which was XYZ committed suicide, and
Yeah.
that bit of hook is what we kind of hold on to, whereas the actual value lies in understanding the story. And so that blog puts out like the task of a lover is to go beyond the headline and understand the story, and so is the task of a filmmaker, storyteller, and the audience
Yeah.
as well, like, and which this film does beautifully. And
I
so,
feel
like,
like
in that
the it
context,
was the just to jump in there, like I
yeah,
feel like the show was structured that way too. Like the opening is the headline, you know.
yeah,
The opening is a bunch of cops burst into a house and arrested a 13-year-old, which conjures up images in your head exactly like the ones you see happen. Like, oh my god, like a child, like what is happening? And I think the point of the show is to make you kind of dig deeper with each episode, because like the first episode is obviously of the kid and you feel sympathy for the kid. Then you learn that, spoilers, but the kid actually did commit the crime. And then then you kind of hear the rumors, the gossip, the sort of like hoopla around who this boy was from the school, you know, where it's like you don't know who the boy is, you just know the perception of the boy, you know. And this is how news reports work, right? Like the story that comes out, like, oh, he was a lonely kid, oh, he was a bright kid, depending on whichever media it is, whatever they choose to focus on. And then you learn about the boy, the boy directly, and then you kind of try to investigate the why. So I like the layering of it being like, first you just see like the bombastic headline, and then
yeah,
the show is not concerned with sticking
yeah,
that at all,
yeah.
which I really appreciate.
Yeah. And then the episode 2, which is about the school, also becomes so much relevant in the story, right?
Yeah.
Because you understand the environment, like the real, and like there are two aspects in this story or in this series. One is the real world, and one is the virtual world. Both play the
Mm.
part in making the boy what he's become, or the ideas that he's bought into. But the moment we move into the school, we see so many youngsters, and like, of the school also being such an chaotic space, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this one funny line where the sub detective, like Misha Franks, he talks about, like, oh, I hate coming to schools. They just smell of like puke and vomit and masturbation.
Yeah.
And it's just like such a chaotic space. And we also kind of think, these teachers, and which I've often thought about, like when I've reflected on my school days,
Yeah.
our teachers who like sort of spent a lot of time with kids of this age and all that. And in the age group that we are, and in the world where we are, also in the social media world, and so much is happening, are these teachers really equipped to kind of deal with the psychology of
Mm.
kids, or like the things that they are experiencing, and which the school episode kind of dives into and shows us
Yeah.
all, sort of all these things. And
And I don't know if it
then
was,
like,
I don't know if it was deliberate. I don't know if this was deliberate, and maybe this is just something I'm projecting. But like having the jail episode and then having the school episode, it felt like the school is a jail too, Like the way that it was formatted, you sort of realize that like a lot of how the structure is and how they move around the place and how the kids feel around the place and the chaos and all of this, like what's the even word, like the lack of any kind of decorum, any kind of like sanity is just missing in the school. In
yeah,
some ways it's even more like chaotic than the prison. These cops
yeah,
who are so used to being around prison like cells and dealing with criminals on a daily basis are way more uncomfortable being at the school. Like they are way more on edge, like oh god. Also because it's a childhood thing, like you associated with like oh my, like you said, going back to your own school time, so like that's what's happening to them as
yeah,
well when they go there. And you realize how not badly run, because obviously everyone's trying to do their best, but the
yeah,
system of a school is set up to kind of be very like a jail in many ways.
yeah. So jumping right into the episode 3, then, right? Like it becomes an important episode because it starts with, we see this person who's like a clinical psychologist kind of going to meet Owen Cooper after 7 months have passed from like the moment he was like kind of caught. And so then you see that the psychologist is there to kind of develop an understanding of him, so that she can submit that sort of thesis or that kind of like research study to the judge, to help him make the decision, which was brilliant. And like then you see that she's there to kind of approach everything from a very dispassionate, observing point of view. Like she's damn good at her job, and she's there to like kind of do it in the best possible manner, and to do justice to the whole system, not just go through a checklist of questions and all that. And she like really wants to understand this boy, and thereby it becomes a very important episode to get into the shoes of this young man. And the first question which he is asked is, what is your idea of masculinity? Or like she asks him, rather, like I think it's not a straightforward question like this, but more about the men in her life. She asks her
Yeah.
about the grandfather, pop, grandpa, and
Pop up. Yeah.
pop, and like the father, and like she's trying to understand the men in the life of this kid, and thereby
Mm.
from that kind of drawing to an idea of masculinity that he has kind of bought into. And I think why it is a very good question, or like why it is a very important question there, is because as a teenage boy, like that is all that you want to be. Like you want to
Mm.
be like, you're transitioning from a teenage like period to like kind of becoming a man into the world. And then it's almost like premature that you really want to become the man, right? And then
Yeah.
you look at all these ideas around you, from pop, like it can be from films, it can be from like sort of various cultural elements, but also to the men closer to you. It can come
Mm.
from the space of you hating men closer to you, you loving, admiring them. And that, all of that kind of contributes to your ideas of masculinity, or you're like how a man in this world is supposed to be. And that, for like sort of Jamie, she's trying to understand that, and that is the first question that she asks. What are your views on that?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of made me wonder, like, what is my idea of like masculinity and how do I view the men in my life?
Mm,
And like, it's a interesting one because something that I have found is I associate masculinity with a lot of discomfort, which
mm,
is really interesting. Like, um, from the point of this idea of we create spaces where we have to constantly compete and like prove ourselves. So I associate masculinity with the idea of like proving your worth in a space to people, whether it's because through knowing things about sports or knowing things about cars or knowing things about like the traditionally like masculine things, endeavors or whatever. So I associate it with this idea of unease, because you constantly feel like you are projecting something that you may not be, you know.
Mm.
And I don't mean this in a negative, like only like toxic, horrible masculinity. I just mean there's a weird just unease that I find with masculinity, and I have never been able to fully reconcile with it. uh, and I think it is because we don't, like, there is not that safe space that masculinity creates for you to just be you have to be a slightly elevated version of you. That's what I
Yeah,
associate masculinity with.
yeah.
What about you?
That is that is such an interesting insight. I think we have talked about this often. No, we have talked about the
Yeah,
idea of what if like we have a support group for our fathers, like all our fathers kind of get together, and then
yeah.
they have a conversation about their experiences. And
Mm,
because we feel like at least we today have the tools, we have the access to these stories or to this language, this vocabulary, we are getting therapy. But our fathers like kind of did not have any of that. Like my mistakes in my life had made me empathize with my dad, who did not have any of these tools or like sort of pursuits in life, and he was just trying to do best in his space and time.
mm,
And we discussed this idea that of what if we have a support group where our fathers talk to each other, but then we
yeah,
immediately dismissed the idea also, because we felt like our fathers will not be vulnerable with each other, because for that generation of men, being vulnerable, sharing your story with each other, they also feel that they are giving the other person the advantage of, you know sort of
yeah,
kind of advantage over them, like advantage over their vulnerability. Because uh, for what better or worse, the men of that generation were so much focused on sort of power games, because
yeah,
survival, I think, was a bigger thing at that point of time. And then everyone thought, okay, revealing information is giving the person the edge over the other, right? And then they
yeah,
came from it, from a structure of power structures and all that. And that is really sad.
yeah,
That is something which our fathers, then our grandfathers kind of missed out on, like. And so Nikhil Taneja, I think there's a beautiful, I think it's almost a must watch it's a 6 to 8 hour long podcast episode with Amit Verma on the seen and
mm,
the unseen, which is about the loneliness of Indian man. And it talks about, like, across age groups, across the country, like what he has termed it as like the loneliness, like, epidemic, which is like men uh, around the world, and like it's in India also, are going through, where we don't have, like, as you talk about, like, safe spaces, because we
yeah,
are not brought up the idea of creating also safe spaces for one another. Like, I think when we grew up around women, or like when we engage with women, or like sort of have women friends, we like men almost feel emotional safety or like safe spaces over there. And thereby, when men are around each other, or where you might also, like, as so there is this uh, on the masculine side, there's also this conversation which in a very reductive manner gets brought about the alpha man, the beta man, like, and all
yeah,
that. And the alpha man is kind of supposed to kind of, oh, make his presence felt in the room. When he enters
mm,
the room, he owns the room, you know and that sometimes also comes at the cost of making people feel unsafe. uh you know and I think uh that is the first task of, in a social gathering, or like in our relationships with one another. Like, I think we should question this to ourselves. That takes the safety of the person takes priority over anything else.
yeah,
Oftentimes, with men, oftentimes I think it's in the most intimate spaces that this kind of takes a back seat, where
mm,
because that it is also s- like not trying to justify it, but like trying to see it from the perspective of men and experience it as men and all that. That kind of emotional safety is also so overwhelming for men when they get it right. This is where men turn violent with like breakups and all that, because that is for the first time, like the women in that context is the only person who is the source of emotional safety, or
mm,
like that space. And when that kind of breaks, that becomes for them that is the only source which is going away for them. Whereas
yeah,
for women, they have like the sisterhood which they have, like sort of they've built around them. And then the
yeah,
kind of conversations that they have around the same, because like fair enough, like for centuries they had to deal with this bullshit, like they had to deal with this violence and like what masculinity did to them. But then they have like kind of sort of evolved and like built that for them. Where are these
Yeah.
safe spaces for men? Where are these,
They're not
sort of,
existent. It's like it's weird how much. So a lot of like the idea of, like men often say this in like, no one cares about our feelings, or no one cares about our emotions. But it's like, yeah, because of us, we have made sure that that's not possible. We have not let people have spaces to talk about themselves. And then when it finally affects you, you realize that, wow, I and our collective, like man, have created this idea that you can't talk about your feelings. We have created that. We have created places where you can't be emotionally vulnerable. Then, like you said, we've just put all of the onus on the women in our lives who are our partners, which is why men take breakups very differently,
yeah,
because they take it as the destruction of the only safe spot, you know the
yeah,
only like area of shade from like the harsh light of masculinity.
mm,
And it's
yeah,
like, how can that be the only thing? How can it be on them? That's why women, it's different. And that's why, like, we, for example, I think, and I don't know if this is every man, but men often prioritize romantic relationships when they're in them in an
yeah,
obsessive way, because they
yeah,
find that comfort. And we need to take the onus away from the women who are already dealing with their own shit of being like women in a patriarchal society, right? And these are just, I mean, at this point, this phrase patriarchal system has been used so much that we kind of use it very loosely. But just think
yeah,
about it, like, imagine a group of people that have been oppressed for so long that they had to create those safe spaces. Then
yeah,
they are using their safe space that they have managed, that they have worked on, to help us as well.
yeah.
Is that fair? Like, or should we also deal with our own shit? Like, I think we
Yeah.
should. um
We
yeah,
should,
it's
but I think it's such an internalized thing also, no?
it is it
Uh,
is
like I have discussed this often with a lot of friends. Like, we have also had this discussion of how difficult it is for men, even of our times, even
Mm,
us, who are kind of, who have access to all the information. They are aware about these things. But even for us to, like, kind of in a moment of difficulty, or in a moment, or like in an everyday moment also, just to go to another man and say, hey man, I need help
yeah,
with this thing. Just like
yeah,
from a, if it is in a work context or all that, like we are able to like maneuver work contexts very well. But it's in the
mm,
everyday friendship, everyday life, in the emotional well-being, in the
yeah,
like feeling more full, like in our own fullness. Like it's very difficult for a man to just go up to another man and say like, hey, I need help with
yeah.
this thing. And that is like
I've
it.
actually
Yeah.
no go for it.
No, no, finish it, man. Yeah, go for it.
I was saying, what I find really interesting about that part of it is, and I've spoken to you about this, I've spoken to a couple of my friends about this, like, men don't operate they only operate in extremes. So the way that, like, another term that I think of when I think of masculinity is like aggressiveness, right? There's an aggression.
Yeah,
And sometimes that's like in a good way as well, like standing up for what you believe in sometimes is good. But the lack of middle ground of speaking with a male friend, where you can either be completely cold and emotionless and like it's for work, you know what I mean? Or the other side of things, where it's not for work, it's for like when basically men show overt aggressive love to a male friend, where they're like, they're like, it's almost for show a little bit. Like it's actually for the women in their life to show that they're like, loving
yeah,
people. But that middle ground of, this is going to sound, I don't know, even saying this, like, there's an internalized thing that I'm struggling with right now saying this, but women hold hands so often.
yeah,
And when they're walking in public, they'll just hold hands,
yeah,
and the idea of two men who are friends holding hands
yeah,
is so ridiculous right now in our brains, but it
yeah,
shouldn't be. And
yeah,
I am not able to do it.
yeah,
This is a conversation that I'm having. I'm unable to be tender with my friends who are
yeah,
men. And this
yeah,
is the discomfort that I'm kind of combating, because I think that we should be able to do that.
yeah. It is difficult and it is awkward. Like I remember
Yeah.
having a very, so a friend of mine was leaving for a long time. Like he was moving to another city, another country. Uh, And so like while leaving and all that, like for the first time it was getting the moment was becoming a little bit sentimental, and we hugged.
Hmm.
And immediately, like after a brief moment of hug, it was like the words which came out of the mouth was, this is gay, little bit gay in it, like, you know.
Yeah.
And it was just like, this is how, like, it's awkward. Like, what this immediately makes me think about is also the episode in Friends when Ross and Joey just sleep with each other, and then they
Yeah.
find extreme comfort in just doing that. And then the way that whole thing plays out, it's brilliantly done in the show. But like, I think that's very, like, I relate a lot with the awkwardness of that.
Yeah.
Like, it's something so deeply ingrained. Like, I think it's a thing of evolution. Maybe as we work on it, it passes on better to the next generation and the next
Yeah.
generation coming after it, and men become comfortable with these things because we desperately need it. We are at the point of time where, like, people are talking about this masculinity crisis. Oh, what does being a man feel?
Hmm.
And then there are different philosophies which are thrown in their way. Like, there's like the religion angle to it. Like, religion tells you, if you subscribe to a religious philosophy, it tells you, oh, this is how a man is supposed to be. Versus, like, no matter what philosophy you subscribe to, like, you can be religious, you can, like, or like in the progressive liberal context, have the philosophies that we subscribe to. On each side of the extreme, I think, no matter what belief system you buy into, there are certain flaws associated with that. And then you have to confront those flaws of what it is making you as a person, and what is the harm that it is causing in the world because of you, or like the hurt that it is bringing out. And that, like, to yourself, to the world, by the extension of that. uh,
Yeah.
and then confronting that becomes important to the task of, because like, I was just thinking about this point, and I was thinking, what are all the religious philosophies leading to? Or what are all the philosophies which are, like, as men also we buy into, leading to? Or like, every gender, like, it talks about, oh, because if you, like, subscribe to this or follow this, it will ultimately lead to freedom. uh,
Hmm.
and this is what, now I was thinking about, what do I tell to young men or like 13-year-olds? And it's such a confusing time, right? Like, you're like, still, you are you're still thinking about all these things. Like, sometimes I think the entire 20s, or like, some part, like, depending on when you are working on this, like, the entire time period just goes to your understanding of what this could be. And then the
Hmm.
most liberating aspect I realize in that is that it is not one thing or the other. You get to define it. That's the most liberating aspect. like
Yeah.
like this whole idea of what a man is supposed to be, I think we treat it almost like externally, looking at from a perspective of, hey, oh, this man carries himself like that, thereby
Yeah.
maybe like masculinity needs to be like that. But it is not necessarily so. Like, there are so many shades to masculinity, or like how men can be. And then in the context of your life, you get to define it. I think,
Yeah.
for me, that is very liberating. Like, I then kind of can talk to myself, okay, these are the values which are important to me, this
Hmm.
is the world which I want to create, these are the systems which I want to, like, live in. What are the values in the system? And then thereby, how would I like to be a man in those places, in those relationships?
Yeah.
I think that is a very liberating thought for me.
Oh, it is. And I think one of the things that makes me think of now, because now we're talking about it in the context of the show and future generations, one thing that they're going to combat that we haven't sort of had to, which Jamie kind of deals with in the show, is the idea of being very online and very on social media. Now, don't get me wrong, we are also very online, right? We're
Yes.
recording this podcast. This is going to be posted on YouTube. We'll make reels on this, and we'll
Yeah.
hope that more people watch it, right? And that's like how it works now. I make content on my page and all of that stuff like that. We do this. But I knew a time before this. I knew
Yeah.
a time when social media didn't exist, right? And when I say social media, it's sort of a broad term, but like platforms where you can join like this collective consciousness, like a
Mm-hmm.
Reddit page about how women are wrong, or like the
Mm-hmm.
manosphere or whatever. And we can get into that. But these kids have not known a world without that existing, without the algorithmic internet existing. They don't know that. They just know a place where this has always been the case. And a fallout from that we're not discussing is, for me and you, when there is an online, let's say someone comments on this podcast saying something negative or aggressive or bad, right?
Yeah.
You and I will be like, that is a thing that happened on YouTube. That is separate from my day to day life, from us hanging out in public, right? We
Yeah.
do not in my brain, it's still, there's still a separation. For these people, these are just two distinct worlds that are very much part of their life. Like, for them, the social media thing is its own version of their life, and it's all interconnected now. It's not, it's when their brains were getting wired and everything was getting figured out, it has now been internalized that that is also equally as important, that
Yeah,
a stranger can just say something and they can get influenced by it. And that is going to be the challenge, I think, for this
yeah.
generation to deal with, because it could get really dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Like, so there are two aspects in this story. One is the street violence which has happened, but
Yeah.
like also the online violence which has happened on him. Like, I was
Yeah.
just thinking about the Jamie and like, look at it. Like, high school in any which way is such a transitioning period. Like, it's so overwhelming. You are going through so
Yeah.
many. Like for us also in our time, it was like kind of challenging in its own ways. Now you look at the fear of isolation this kid had, like the challenges that he was experiencing, like all these things, that he was being bullied, he was being like called all these things. And in to all of that you add the online world where all of these things kind of double down. It becomes like
Mm.
much more worse, like you feel like the entire world is hating you. And
Yeah.
then I think like this idea of calling young men on internet, like calling them out as incels, or like does it really help, like, or is it
Mm.
distancing them away further? Because
Yeah.
for me, like, the brilliant line was in Jojo Rabbit, where like sort of, I think she tells, like, the mother, or like the other girl tells him ki, you're not a Nazi, Jojo, you're just a 9-year-old boy who wanted to join a club,
Yeah.
who wants to join a club. And like that, it's a sense of belonging, right? Like for all these
Yeah.
men, I can understand that, like when they are like kind of distanced away, or like they are kind of removed from all the other, like all the other social circles where they don't find acceptance, then they
Yeah.
find community, then they find like kind of sense of belonging in these, sort of, then they are like leveraged by these toxic dialogues or communities which are out there, which are almost taking advantage of them, like of their
Yeah.
vulnerabilities. And that, like, then that kind of presence on the internet world like then trickles down into the everyday life in this particular manner, which is
Mm.
the reality of Jamie. And it is something where I have been thinking about, where does the intervention happen? uh, because I, like, as social media creators, or like creators in general, we have talked about the idea of like how easy it is to pander to young men. Like
Mm.
majority of, like today's, like most of the popular YouTubers in India, or like creators in India, podcasters, or whatnot you call them, they kind of uh, ride so much on the back of like these young men, and like just trying to pander to them, like the lowest common denominator within
Yeah.
them, because it's so easy to like kind of tap into the uh like primal things, right, which this man
Yeah.
experience, like horniness, like sort of, like, or the hatred that they have, or like whatever, like that they feel in is cringe in their circles,
Yeah.
versus like to making, like, as a creator, to make your audience truly feel joy, truly move them, to truly make them feel inspired. That's a difficult
Yeah.
task. You have to kind of work through a lot of things as audience and creator together to kind of achieve, like, go there. But like a lot of these uh like we have reached a time in history where like a lot of these like popular YouTubers or like popular like creators have piggybacked on the on the backs of these young men. And I
Mm.
have been thinking about, okay, where does the intervention happen? Like, as they are profiting from the lives of so many thousands and millions of young men, where does the
Yeah.
intervention happen? How do we give these young men the tools to kind of maneuver all these things? And that is, I think, it's a question which I'm thinking about with no answer in particular right now.
Yeah. It's really tricky because a lot of the things that I have are questions about this more than knowing what the answer is. And one of the things is like, why is there such a prevalent need for a specific type of content, especially catered to men, which is based around winning an argument over someone in like a cool fashion, like
Mm,
the one that we were discussing was Jordan Peterson owns feminazi. Like, that's the
mm,
headline. I've seen this often. I'm a man on YouTube that's scrolling through stuff, and they will definitely be like, hey, does this Jordan Peterson video interest you? It will happen because they're hoping that you latch onto it. And I'm wondering why it is that that kind of bite-sized owning someone or like winning a argument gets the priority platform, gets the views, gets young people, young men specifically, really like riled up, and they believe this very well packaged, canonized narrative. Like they buy into it. They buy into the idea that like this is happening. It's like for them, it's like the idea of a war. Like they are like this is like a man at war fighting and winning over the enemy, right? The way that it's packaged is very much like that. They're kind of catering to that base level feeling,
Yeah.
which is what I also was thinking about when I thought about masculinity, is the idea of like winning and success.
Yeah.
That's what they associate being a man with. And that's why this becomes very important. Like young men like to attach themselves to people like a Logan Paul, or people like within India also. There's a bunch of creators, I'm sure. Look
Mm.
at the president of the United States. Like his
Yeah.
whole thing is winning. It's not about his policies. It's
Yeah.
about success, and associating with that. And that's really concerning, because the stories that we're telling these young men is, you actually shouldn't be an empathetic person. You should be winning. You should
Yeah.
be on top at all points. You should be like never seen, and like taking that vulnerability thing to a different level, right? Like don't just not be vulnerable. Also, like don't be seen acknowledging that you may be wrong. You cannot.
Yeah.
You have to hold ground. You have to win over empathy.
Yeah.
Over like empathizing with someone. So that, I don't know why that is even more prevalent, but that is a real like wave. um, and
Mhm.
often the outlet when men feel like that is challenged, if they are proven wrong in a public space, or they're publicly humiliated in their eyes because someone pointed out something that they then looked not great, a lot of their outlets are violence. Then
Yeah.
is anger, is like, well, now I need to snuff that out immediately,
Yeah.
which I think plays an important part in how Jamie acts, because
Yeah.
he feels like justice needs to be done for his humiliation that happened
Yeah.
in front of his friends, in front of
Yeah.
people online who saw it and liked the comment of the girl under his post where she called him an incel. So in his
Yeah.
head, he's like, that is equivalent of, that's the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
So it is scary, man. It is really scary.
It is leading up to that as well, right? Like where he's kind of thinking that he can ask her out because she's in her weakest moment, and
Yeah,
then she replies with, "Oh, I'm not that desperate," and that kind of sort of pushes him like further into the whole thing. Because
yeah,
like look at it, like this young boy who's like throughout the show he's charming, he's sweet, he's you see that there is a lot of potential, like there is a future. You almost want to I don't know, like you almost want to root for this boy, like in the sense ki,
yeah.
oh, I hope he has not committed the murder. Like I hope
Mhm,
he has not, like kind of like there is some way out for him through all of
mhm.
this. And which I think is brilliant designing and storytelling as well. Like there has been a lot of
Yeah,
criticism of the show, of it being like, why was the murderer or a white kid, you know
yeah.
uh, and I feel like a lot of people just say ki, oh, there's some agenda associated with this, and there's
Mhm,
because they want to showcase, oh, it's the liberal values creeping in, and
yeah,
like all that. But actually that's such a bullshit take, because this is a genius moment in the designing of the show, and like where the DI Bascom is a black man, and like and his sub detective is a woman, and like the boy who's committed the crime is a white man. Like
mm,
I strongly feel, and I want to say this is a belief, not a fact, but like if it were like a black man, or like a black boy who had committed, or like a person of color rather, who had committed this crime, then this
yeah,
conversation would not have been about masculinity at all. Like then it would have taken a very
mm,
different angle. Then it would have been of the like the color of the person, then the like that
yeah,
part of the society, which is not what this story is about. Like it doesn't take like like extravagant understanding or genius in the world to realize that this is a very prevalent problem of our times. This is across, sort of,
yeah.
this goes beyond race, diversity, caste, gender. Like you know this idea of what this boy did is like very much in front of you. like in Europe, like the violence in Italy which is happening on women in
Mm,
intimate relationships, uh, when after sports teams, like sort of the fans, the way they react on streets. And also in India, the way it is happening, like it is something which we don't need to be like, okay, this is a problem on the fringe. No, it is very much mainstream, it is right in front of us,
yeah,
and it is very important for us to kind of confront that. And this is why this show is important, and this is why the boy being a white boy was, and you should credit the writers of the show for making this genius move of like for end of
yeah.
writing that character that way. And yeah, uh, so like, is there anything that you want to talk about that, or can we segue into the
I,
another thing?
yeah, I mean, no, I just kind of just wanted to touch upon the last thing about how a lot of the idea of those communities that exist with the men that believe that feminists are the problem. It's called the manosphere. It's a group of men that think that women are sort of the issue.
Mm,
That are, because any kind of fight for equality feels like oppression to these men. You know,
mm,
so they view it as a negative thing. A lot of it is media related. Like, this is why adolescence is important, is because the terminology that the manosphere uses is things like the red pill, which is from the Matrix, which is like hilarious because the Matrix is a trans allegory. Like, the Matrix is about oppressed people, especially
mm,
trans people, given the Wachowski, like the sisters, who didn't know at the time that what they were experiencing was the trans experience, and that's what the Matrix is about. But that's been co-opted and used by these men.
yeah.
And even symbols like the Joker, for example, in these sort of in that sphere of, like, he becomes a symbol of that, everything that, like, the incel character will relate to and attach to. So that's why it's kind of important, the media stuff. That's why it's
Mm,
important for a show like Adolescence to exist, because, like,
yeah.
it does matter. People watching this do
Mm,
get influenced by it.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a brilliant point, and I think it is a right segue into the next thing also, which I wanted to talk about.
yeah.
Because I was also feeling like I wanted to introspect, how did we get here?
Huh.
What did we do, like in the past, say like 2 decades, 3 decades, or like even before that? Like obviously there has been this problem of men for centuries, but like in the past 2 decades, what have we done to kind of arrive at these conversations and these dialogues in this manner? And I think
Hmm.
there was like a philosophical void, like a thing which we did not address at all, and that got overtaken by these men, kind of talking
Yeah.
about like the manosphere, and like, okay, men are supposed to be like this is how you are kind of supposed to like have edge on other men, and like
Hmm.
be with the women in your life. I think this happened because we also somewhere stopped paying attention towards these things. We felt like we might just coast through these things and kind of arrive at that. And specifically this for me uh, comes down to men's relationship with anger, uh, in like
Yeah.
as an emotion. I was like, like personally I was like, as you go through teenage and like you try to explore life, and then you come across with the frustrations that you might have with the various systems around you. Like one of the first things which, or like a natural thing which happens, is that you feel angry towards the maybe the people who have wronged you, or the systems which you feel limited by, or like where you are not able to progress. Because uh as we are like sort of also calling out these men for being like like buying into these ideas, you should also see like in the reality of India is like majority of the young men don't have a, like the unemployment rate is very high,
Yeah.
the sense of direction in life is very high, the systems from the top down are screwing these men, like which
Hmm.
for centuries like were in favor of the men, and like kind of the men reaching forward in their life based on the systems. Right now they are like kind of at the uh, at the receiving end, where like they are like kind of like they don't have a sense of direction in life. They don't, like there
Yeah.
is deep uncertainty with the future of like there is a lot of financial anxiety, and like career anxiety, and like sort of then all of that trickling down into your life, and thereby like immediate response on in whatever circles that the men go is anger,
Yeah.
and then the anger gets exercised in a very violent manner. And thereby I
Yeah.
think it's a moment of introspection for us men also to kind of think about, oh, how do I want my relationship with anger to be as an emotion?
Yeah.
Because I feel it is a very important emotion. I feel it can bring revolution, it can, like it has a power to bring transformation if we kind of really try to understand, and okay, this is what anger this is what is making me angry in my
Yeah.
life. I don't want
Yeah.
to let anger consume me. Like, okay, like in the moment of fit, just break things and like, or like, sort of let that
Mm,
anger come out in another manner. But I can really tap into that anger and like create constructive change in my life and in the life around me, which I think for Jamie also that is kind of happening, right? He like in his circles now. Let's kind of also go into a microscopic level, like the school which he was coming from, or like the spaces he was in. He was
mm,
bullied. He was spat on.
yeah.
He was isolated. So obviously, like that boy had a lot of anger in him, and
Mm,
like that anger also kind of, then the Erin Dorothy, the psychologist, is also asking him this thing, like, how have you seen anger in your life? Does your dad get angry? Did your
yeah.
grandfather get angry? How did that anger manifest? And she's trying to
Yeah.
understand that. And I think it's a brilliant moment after the masculinity question. It is leading into this. And I think that for that then that becomes for every man to question, oh, what is my relationship with anger?
Yeah, and I think the thing with anger specifically is that it's a lot of times like men are expressing it to the wrong people, in a very aggressive way because it's the easy thing to do. And the problem is the thing that will garner attention is the easy answer, like the bite size, like women are the problem. If you just give that in a headline, if you just say that like you need to be more like this, men, you need to be like a man in a cave again, like that's basically what they're trying to project, is like men used to go to wars, all of this stuff. And the thing is, the difficult answer is it's a system that we created, right? And a lot of these companies, giant corporations, don't want you to have that tough conversation and figure out who's actually screwing you over, who's actually the
Yeah,
reason you're unemployed, who's actually the reason you're being bullied, who's actually the reason that all of this is happening. They don't want you to come up to that. So a lot of these like systems, whether it's a giant corporation or it's a school or it's any group of people, any kind of cult, honestly, any kind
yeah,
of cult operates on very easy to digest sort of instructions, like
yeah,
you just need to do this. The problem is the combative tools that we have are
yeah,
more nuanced. The way that we're trying to approach it is very, let's have a conversation. But
yeah,
what wins an election is the question,
yeah,
right? Is it the nuanced conversation where you try to sit down with someone, or you have a slogan on a billboard and men
yeah,
gravitate towards it because it's the easy answer and it explains all their pain? Instead,
yeah,
because actually, if they had to explore where the pain's coming from, it would take a lot. Like, it is an emotionally draining process. Is that easier to do? Or is it just easier to go, well, actually that external person, they're the problem. It's just
yeah,
they just redirect you to that. And the hilarious thing is they profit off of it, whether it's on a YouTuber level, or like someone like a there's this podcast called Fresh and Fit Podcast, which is two men who just say, women are the problem of everything, right? And they have a
yeah,
podcast, they make money off of it, they get brand deals off
yeah,
of it, people jump on board, and men latch onto it more and more and get angrier and angrier. And then
yeah,
beyond that, on a company level, you're getting sold ideas and like, I mean, I don't want to say it's all capitalism because it's like it's a little more complicated than that, but like when your anger is their profit, something's wrong, right? And
yeah,
when they are not getting hurt by your unemployment or your ostracization, they don't get affected by it, but they do profit
yeah,
off of your response to it.
yeah,
And that's where it gets like really complicated. And like when we're talking about the origin of all of this, you're right,
yeah.
like maybe there was a philosophical like void,
Void. Yeah,
there was a gap, and companies were like, money, that is money, we will figure
yeah,
it out. Guys, this the problem is women. Here
yeah,
are things that we can sell you that you will buy into, and you can just target other people. And it's not just women, right? It's a lot of minorities that face this, and that's why Jamie is a white boy, right? That's
yeah,
one of the things. It's like they are not the
yeah,
minority, and
yeah,
it's easy to manipulate them into thinking that that's the problem, so that they can look in that
yeah,
direction. So
yeah. And it
yeah,
does, like, does sound very taxing also, right? Like I
yeah,
almost imagine young men listening to this, or like men of any age actually listening to this, saying,
yeah. And
"Yeah,
they're
na
like,
yaar,
oh,
kaun kaam
dude,
karega?"
okay, here we go. Yeah, he'd be like, oh, here
Like
we go. He's going to talk about the system. Ugh. It's
Yeah,
not.
who
It's not
will,
even
like,
easy to get that message.
in the same like breath we talk about, like, when we, like, because we love cinema, we want to watch it, we want to watch meaningful cinema, and sort of like find our joys through it. But like, I have had conversations with friends who kind of, have a very taxing day at work, and then they like spend a week
Mm,
when they are like kind of, sort of trying to just put up with life, and like, sort of deal with their boss, we deal with their managers, toxic work cultures and all that. And then they are kind of coming to, uh like, sort of, they just say ki, oh, I don't want to watch something which is demanding questions out of me, or like, sort of making me want to invest my mind. This is the where the idea of mindless content also came from. Like, I just want to
yeah,
blow off steam, I just want to watch something which is not like kind of making me work also as an audience, which I feel like, I don't know where I sit on that. I feel it is a fair thing, but I
yeah.
think the reduction that
I
it
have
is
a point
doing to
for it.
you. Yeah, yeah, go for it.
So this is really random, slightly a tangent. Okay, as you were
Yeah.
saying this, I just remembered. So I was watching this show with my mom. Okay, it's called Murder in Mahim. Okay,
Hmm.
it's a show that I think it's on Hotstar. Now, is it a good show? No. Like, it's the most like generic. Every time an emotion happens,
There,
a music
there
video
goes our
kicks.
Hotstar deal, but
No, I'm just saying it's one show on Hotstar.
yeah,
Hotstar has many
yeah.
great shows, guys. Go check it out. Please still sponsor us. Anyway, uh, so Modern Mahim, it's about, it's actually about like a person who was killed, and the show is about, and this is off of like 15 minutes of watching it, okay, guys? So don't yell at me about what the plot is. But from what I gathered from this episode, is that it's about a man who was killed, who it turns out was, uh, suppressing the fact that he was queer, that he was a gay man, right? And the one of the suspects is his lover, who comes out and says that like this was the experience that this person was having, and he's telling this story about like their love story. This man is saying to Ashutosh Rana, who's the cop who's investigating. Now,
Yeah.
the dialogue is like the most basic level. Like Ashutosh Rana literally at one point says, "It is really hard being gay in Indian society." Like he delivers it like this, by the way, like the
Yeah.
most like. But I was thinking as I was watching this,
Yeah.
to someone who doesn't like hasn't been exposed to as much media, that has not watched all of this stuff, that doesn't want to watch taxing stuff, that enjoys
Mhm.
how kind of basic some content is, isn't it kind of good that this exists? Because they're going to consume it. It's very bingeable. It's very
Mm.
bingeable. But it's the
Mm.
most like basic version of talking about these issues. Like talking about
Yeah.
homophobia on a very basic, not nuanced level at all, but it is hitting home. Like
Mm.
the fact that people I know of that generation are watching it, and it's very consumable. I'm like, maybe there's something to this also. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's something that I'm grappling with as well, because my thing usually is, dude, like, why are you watching mindless content? Sometimes you do wonder, like, I mean, I watch mindless content, but I know what it is,
Yeah.
But I'm also open to watching like stuff that challenges my brain. So I have been kind of negative on that, but now I'm starting to see the other side of it. So yeah, plug for Murder and Mahim. It's on Hotstar. Go check it out, is what I would say.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there is space for all types of content to be out there. But who are we to talk about? We love badass Ravi Kumar. But
Yeah. Yeah,
but
Baz Ravi Kumar.
but like, but what we are just asking is for the content creators and like the storytellers and all that. Like, yeah, there is space for all these things, but do better,
Yeah.
like with
Yeah, do
every
better.
step.
If you're making mindless
That's the,
content, I would rather it be Murder and Mahim than like, I don't
yeah,
know, like Houseful 6,
yeah,
Uh, that's just my
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so like, just coming back to our thing about like the anger, I also get how, like, how hard it is. It is hard because
Mm,
it's also such a fine line, like, being consumed by anger or being consumed by an emotion to the point where you lose yourself completely, and commit a horrible act like Jamie has done, which is murder someone. There's also like a very clear difference, but also a fine line of how you find a true moment of connection as well. A true moment of connection also happens when you lose yourself into
mm,
someone or something. But just the difference is that this other side where you lose yourself to anger or like to negative emotions, there's a numbing of senses. Whereas like in a moment of true connection, or when you are kind of finding an honest moment with someone, there's almost a heightened sense of awareness, like, or the sensory
Mm.
experiences, like you feel all of that kind of coming together. I think it is worth striving for. Like in the last, like, two couple of months ago, I was reading a lot about men who had done violent things on women, and like kind of in their 20s, and then they kind of growing from that and sort of establishing. And I was also questioning ki, if, say for example, if at some point of time in their youth they might have done something wrong, or like, on the scale of like whatever the violence that they might have committed, or like gotten into fight and like been violent towards women, where is the trajectory going? And because like some of the men who had put in the work, like really tried to introspect and kind of gone through that like difficult process, as you're talking about, it is draining, it is kind
Mm.
of, the catharsis on emotional, spiritual, psychological level is intense. It is very difficult. It's almost like a, like the closest metaphorical analogy that I can draw is a caterpillar breaking free and becoming a butterfly, like, the
Yeah.
pain of that process. But on the other end is true joy, true connection, true fullness as a human being, and that is worth striving for. Because if you are not like kind of doing that, then you are stuck in the patterns, then you are kind of, then every other breakup is just the same, then every other like disappointment in life, every failure, you are kind of hitting the rock bottom in the similar manner and responding to it.
Yeah.
You will respond to rock, like you will hit rock bottoms, like you will kind of, sort of face difficult moments in life. But how do you grow from that, and like, I don't know, how build a better life for yourself and for the other people around you? I think that is a better masculinity that I want to subscribe to. Like, it's not a man who's like like a, an adarsh man, which is a lot of content I grew up on as a child. Like, oh, the adarsh boy, or like, like the kind of tropes which I get told in our mythological characters as well. Like, this was purely a good person. He was the elder
Mm.
son. He was nice. He
Yeah.
idolized everything, and he did not commit one mistake in his life and all that. Versus, I would like, we were talking about like flawed women in the last episode, but like also flawed men who like make mistakes, who sometimes buy into all these cultural dialogues in their early 20s or
Mm.
whatever point in their life, make mistake, but then after they confront that, then they also kind of grow from that. I think that those kind of stories are really missing, and I think it's a good time to tap into those stories and tell those stories today. uh
Yeah.
so yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like the idea of, the word patriarchy is used a lot, but to me sometimes patriarchy is the enforcing of perfection of how you fit into the box. Like patriarchy doesn't just put you in a box, it wants you to fit in there really nicely and snug and keep
Yeah.
you there. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to do, is not subscribe to it anymore, and it's really tough.
Yeah.
And I think maybe some more kindness in how to deal with it, because the alternative is easier. The alternative is going to be a smoother ride, and that's why people take it. Like, you brought this up to me, and I hadn't thought about it, but like in Rang De Basanti, for example, right? Which again, like that's a whole portrayal of masculinity, which I find really interesting. But you had talked about, Karan, the character, not me, the character Karan in Rang De Basanti, and his interaction with his father, where after he's killed the minister, his father gives him an easy out, because the system gives you an easy out. And the father's like, I can make this all go away,
Yeah.
because the system will cater to you. Now, the tough part is going, no, I want to actually own up to my stuff.
Yeah.
I want to deal with it. And in
Yeah.
Karan's case, it is to challenge or channel his anger in a way that he feels is good, even at the cost of his own life, or his. I mean, for all he knows, he's going to jail, but he doesn't want to run away from that. He wants to
Yeah.
confront it. So that kind of is a good representation of that.
Yeah. Which I think, when I was thinking about that, and then after watching this show also, I felt it is the worst thing which you can do as a parent, as a friend, as an elder brother, or like anyone who kind of becomes aware of, like, oh, your person who's close to you must have done something horrible. Like, growing up in a small town, and like this was also the first instinct that which we were brought up with. Oh, you have done something bad, we will cover it up. We have
Mm.
connections. We know XYZ politician, we know XYZ cop, and we will find a way to make it right. Like, we will give you the way out, like it will be all right, you don't need to worry about it. I think this is the worst thing which you can do to your friend, or
Yeah.
like, even if they get away with, it's not the aspect of getting away with it, but the fact that they have to live with it for all their life. I think that is
Yeah.
difficult. I think the whole journey of what Jamie also goes through is he comes to term with living with that fact, you know.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, very much important. Like in the context of Rang De Basanti is what Anupam Kher says to Karan, right? Hey,
Yeah.
you don't worry about this. We'll blame it all on your friends. We will say that you were under the influence of your friends. I will make sure that you go to America, you get an access to some university, and
Yeah.
you are
Correct.
separate from this life.
1 second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just recording right now. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. That's cool.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's cool. We'll keep that in. Uh, but like the fact of like, oh, we'll just cover this up for you. Like you will find
Yeah.
like we will take care. You don't need to worry about it. And
Yeah.
like a lot of men, I think, are brought up with the fact that oh, I am like there are men to like, or there are systems out there to protect me. But actually, it is not about you. That is not protection at all. That
Yeah.
is just a reductive way of like kind of making you move on to the next thing. And like then you are damaging it. Forget about the damage and hurt. You're obviously you are creating a lot of hurt and damage in the world, but you are not
Mm.
living with yourself. Like how are you
Yeah.
living with yourself? Like how are you living? You're not able to experience again
You're
true
just gonna get
joy,
away
true
with
like
it. And yeah, you're not
yeah.
gonna confront yourself. And like, because I mean, these Amir Khan films are out now in theaters. And like I was like revisiting Rang De Basanti. And I also realized that I remember when that film came out, there was a lot of the criticism or the controversy was, why are these men doing so much for a friend that died? Like, that's too far. Why would you go that far for a death that didn't personally affect you? Because I think the idea is that men don't understand the concept of going above and beyond for someone else because everything comes to them. Everything is catered to them. So the idea of letting go of all that privilege and all of that thing that is catered to you in society and like actually putting yourself out there in a way that'll hurt you, that'll affect you, but you are doing this for a friend is a very alien concept that we don't see in men because men are traditionally meant for greater things or for personal achievement, for victory. But the idea of letting go of all of that just to be there for your friend in whatever capacity, like when they're sitting there protesting, that peaceful protest against when their friend Ajay dies, and they're sitting there and protesting. If you notice, the women are just readily there. They're like, this is for Ajay, we're doing this. And Sharman Joshi's character, he's like, yo, we're gonna get hurt here. He's not ready. He's not comfortable with this at all, because his whole life has been about comfort and enjoyment and all these things. And it actually, now looking back, was about let go of that and just be present for other people in your life. And I think that's it sounds so simple, but it's a big learning lesson for men.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Sharman Joshi's character also has a lot of fear with various
Oh, yeah.
things. He feels that
Yeah.
he's the one who's like kind of constantly think he's kind of in the Jamie space, right? He
Yeah.
feels that he's not worthy of being loved. He feels that he might not find the women that he finds love with and all that. And it's so similar to Jamie because then the camaraderie which he gets because with DJ and like how DJ
Yeah.
responds to him. I think that is something which like Jamie is still a young boy, he's 13-year-old, but he's like kind of not experiencing in his life. And in the show, then all of this kind of leads to the moment of you know how how Jamie's relationship with shame as well, right? And there is
Mm.
this one moment which is talked about in the like the series quite a lot, which is out in the football field where the psy- therapist asks him ki, are you into sports, what were you doing and all,
Mm.
and going through. And he talks about a moment when his dad took him for a match for a football thing, and when
Yeah.
he fucked up, uh, and all the other dads were looking at him in a funny way or like looking at him with whatever, making fun of him. He was felt disappointed in himself, and then he looked towards his dad, and where his dad, he says like that he couldn't look at him, he looked away. And I feel that is such a gut wrenching moment for Jamie.
Yeah.
And I feel it is very important because in the lives that we also live, there might be a lot of moments when we have to take our shame to our friends or like to the people who are closer to us, or we might our friends might also bring their shame to us, and try to talk about it. And in that moment we can like, there are moments if we turn away from that and we say no, not a me problem, this is something which I don't want to get into, you actually push your friend or closer one deeper down into that shame. And
Yeah.
which is why I feel like sort of a lot of times in my life I have been fortunate to have friends who have sort of taken that and said, this shame is separate. This is not you as a person. This is its own separate thing that you have to work with. And that
Mm.
kind of helped me work on it constructively and like kind of sort of treat that. But for Jamie, that was not the case. Immediately his father, who was his appropriate adult, like the closest confidant, and like and he turned away. And that changed his relationship with how he might be experiencing shame in his life. And because he was then bullied at school and like kind of sort of
Yeah,
made felt shame on a everyday basis, that came online when he got called out in cell. And like people also responded to that. It all kind of
yeah,
built up. And I think that shame is, as much we are talking about masculinity, as much as we are talking about rage, I think
yeah.
the shame like
It's a
which
big part of
Jamie felt was a stronger thing, which also led to what he did with Katie.
it. Absolutely, man.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to kind of add to this bit?
I think no, I think it's also relevant because if you just think about how the dad also remembers that, because it's
Yeah.
not just Jamie's story, it's also the dad knows what he did, and it
Yeah.
kind of haunts him because he's like, I wasn't there for my son. And I think, like, to round it off into that, that arc of it, we spoke about what will we tell the younger generation, and then we spoke about our older generation, like our parents, our fathers. And often we look at them as like, they need support and they need help, and we need to like have a support group for the fathers, all of that stuff. But we need a support group. We have stuff that we've not dealt with at all, that
Yeah.
will get trickled down. We're not like, going to be perfect father
Yeah.
figures to the next generation. And I think unless we deal with all this stuff, it will trickle down to them. That's
Yeah.
and it is. And it actually is getting amplified. Like, I find a lot of the young men to, in fact, be more stuck in that past than even I am in some ways, because they are experiencing a system that was created and never broken. And it's actually become amplified. Now it's like, now you look at your phone and you will get Andrew Tate propaganda, like, immediately.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. Uh,
Yeah.
when I was a developed adult, I didn't have to deal with that anymore. Like, because
Yeah.
now when I get it, I'm like, oh, this is propaganda. But if I was a kid
Yeah.
and this came to me, I like genuinely scares me what I could be right now. You know,
Yeah.
and maybe I would be posting about adolescence being like agenda or propaganda. Like, it's very easy how
Yeah.
that kind of gets communicated. And um,
Yeah.
I think we need to break the cycle of discomfort, or
Yeah.
not discomfort of, which is like enforced by men. Like, we have to be uncomfortable, but
Mm.
we need to make spaces within men where you can be very comfortable to be yourself.
Yeah.
And that father son moment is a big representative of that. That they weren't comfortable.
Yeah.
Their father's son, and
Yeah.
he wasn't comfortable to look at his son and be like, "Hey, it's okay. It's just a
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, football's not for you. So what? Like, it doesn't matter, right?"
Yeah.
But because he had not dealt with his own feelings on sports, and
Yeah.
how he was good at sports, the father, clearly you can tell that he's like, was an athlete and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really bummed me out, that moment. And I
Yeah.
think it's representative of like, we need to communicate better.
Yeah. And I think that the thing was mirrored brilliantly in Detective Bascom and his relationship with his son. Uh,
Yeah.
because like so Ashley Walters, again, a standout performance in this series, like the way he
Mm.
does his character. Uh, what happens is like as you go into the school episode, you see that Adam, his son that he's been talking to, like he gets introduced in the first episode as well. You see that his son is also bullied in school. You see that his son is also experiencing the same things perhaps with Jamie experienced, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of realizes, like, then there is a moment when he says like, I can say that I love my son, but I've never said it to him. And towards the end of the episode, there comes a moment when he's like, yes, I have important tasks at my hand and I have to do stuff, but I need to also kind of, okay, let's go out and grab a meal, spend
Yeah.
some time together. And I think in the life of Adam, that is a very important moment. Just as in Jamie's life, that soccer moment is very important. That particular core memory of having a meal, like just going out with your dad, having a meal and like just kind of experiencing that, and that's a breakthrough moment for both of them. I think that is going to register, and it's brilliantly mirrored in the writing of the show in general.
Yeah, because he realizes there, right? Like when he chases down that boy who is Jamie's friend, who gave him the
Yeah.
weapon, and he catches him and they arrest him.
Yeah.
Bascom realizes in that moment that this could be my son.
Yeah.
He never says it, but he's like, my son is also getting bullied. He saw when he went to those
Mhm.
classrooms, he went to his son's class and he saw that his son was getting bullied. And
Yeah.
he realized that his son is actually, the son helps him solve the case, to be honest. Like the son says that you're not looking at the social media. If you are investigating the why and you're looking for a motive, then you are
Yeah.
not understanding how this works. And then he realizes, oh, my son knows this because my son has faced this. And
Yeah.
he realizes that if I don't stop right now, this could be my son. And that's like,
Yeah.
that's, it's devastating, but it's also like, oh,
Mhm.
thank God, because it was like
Yeah.
a train wreck waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great show with so many
Yeah.
moments like that. It's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. And that's where the treatment of the filmmaking as well, like the one take thing, it just doesn't come as a filmmaking hack or like, a
yeah,
stylistic statement, but more so servicing the story. Because that was also the moment when oftentimes when a chase sequence happens, it's always like there is a like stylistic element involved with it. You
yeah,
see
yeah,
that
yeah,
the cop is going to like kind of jump through things, catch the
yeah,
thing, and like, that there's a whole show gets put put on because of that. Here you see that the realness of it, like when
yeah,
Bascom has like first chased that young boy and he's coming back from that. This also happens in the therapist episode when after that one first confrontation moment she comes out, and you
sure,
get
yeah,
the moment in between where what is happening in between, how are they registering that entire emotion. And I felt like so much for Bascom ki, oh, he's caught, he who has he chased, he's chased a 13-year-old boy, and he's kind
yeah,
of living with the fact oh like we are doing this to boys in our society, or like
yeah,
my son is like kind of dealing with all of these things. And like as he sat with it, I as an audience also sat with it, oh shit, this is the emotion of like how sometimes, and in mainstream cinema it becomes very reductive of cops to just shoot people, and you don't really see the effect of cops commit like like actors also mainstream or heroes also committing that violence. You don't see the
yeah.
effect on that can have on your hero, but here Bascom is kind of living with that, like like sitting with that
Bascom
truly.
actually tells him to when because he runs across the road, and Bascom is like, "Watch out!" Like Bascom is chasing him, but also being like, "Yo, be careful! Like, what are you doing?" It's
Yeah.
like a weird push and pull that he has to do,
Yeah.
and it's like it's it's so the one take, the one shot gimmick, that is often
Yeah.
used. And I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
always used badly. Like, of course, the examples always used well, but I think here it's because they don't want you to look away. They want you to
Yeah.
keep to look closer. They're like, no, we're not going to cut away from this because
Yeah.
you're not let off the hook.
Yeah.
It's like you don't get to just move away from it to the next scene. Because a lot of times what happens is you see a stressful situation, it cuts to, like in Bollywood films used to be, a horrible scene happens. Like I was thinking about where Hrithik Roshan in Fizza, he gets indoctrinated into this terrorist group. That's a scene
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah.
And the film lets you off the hook because the next scene is Johnny Lever being a yoga instructor doing like a comedy bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes films do that. They give you that break. But this is like, no,
Yeah.
you are also the problem. So
Yeah.
don't shy away from this. Even Jamie looks at the camera once and he's like he literally looks at us and he's like, don't
Yeah.
what does he said? Oh, do you think I'm gonna tell you something that you want to hear? Like
Yeah.
he's telling us, he's telling her, but he's also telling us, like, what did you expect?
Yeah.
You want the easy answer. That oh,
Yeah.
because my dad was angry, so I'm angry. It's like it's
Yeah.
not that simple. And that's what the show's
Yeah.
saying. It's not that simple. You can't look away. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's such a good point. I think that makes me think that how culturally in the Indian context, we need to change our relationship with how we look at cinema or stories.
yeah,
We often look at that as just entertainment pieces. And thereby we do this, like, sort of a moment of excruciating pain is followed up by a moment of, oh, look, just let's just make laughter. Like,
yeah,
the thing which also like some directors operate with, like you make them either feel surprised, shocked, or, you know, like, like laughter, some intense emotion, and they're like just following a formula. Whereas like if we change our relationship with like how we look at films and stories, that they have so much to offer, like, and then there is so much like, because we are also, eh, for better or worse, we are cultural products of the kind of films which we are watching, of the
yeah,
kind of stuff that we are consuming. right? And thereby, if we kind of have a positive relationship, or like the way we look at cinema and what we want out of it, we can make these changes as an audience as well into the grammar of films and how it can transpire and all that. But yeah, brilliant film on that front. I think uh, we have almost covered all the points, but yeah, apart from, so I think one thing which moves on from the shame bit is, like, in the fourth episode is where Jamie comes down and like like calls his dad on his birthday, and he says, "Dad, I know it's your birthday and all, but I also wanted to tell you that I'm going to, admit guilty. I'm going to
Mm.
confess." And I feel that is a also a pivotal moment, because for Jamie it doesn't matter for the world to like know the truth, but as much for
Well,
his dad to like, or like
absolutely.
for him to also live with it. And I was also thinking about shame and guilt, and the first thing which he experienced, like he's in this position because he's sort of experience shame in certain manners. And shame is a very, like, in many ways, like kind of a very individual and narcissistic emotion. It's about I was
Mm.
looked wrongly in the eyes of these people, and
Correct.
this is what these people think about me. Whereas guilt is more about like, oh, I need to take responsibility of, like, this is what I feel guilty of, this is how I need to fix it. And then you become truly a member of the society or a person in this world, like when
Yeah.
you, I think, move from shame to guilt. And
Yeah.
Jamie has done that. Like he's kind of moved, like, from shame to, like, because he's, again, he's a thoughtful boy. Like he's there is a lot of potential there. So he's kind of done that work of like, okay, I need to confess guilty. And then the mother also says, right, like the dad who's kind of still coming to terms with it.
Absolutely, man.
Yes. Anything
I
else?
think
Like,
we
do you
covered.
have?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. I would recommend everyone watch the show.
Yes.
'Cause I think it's the show that you need. It'll be talked about for years to come, and I think
Yeah.
you do want to experience it and have that conversation. It's that
Mm.
kind of show where, like, as soon as you watch it, you want to get on and talk to people about it.
Yeah.
And I think we need more stuff like that where it leaves you with questions.
Yeah.
More content that makes you question everything, and
Yeah.
makes you really want to sit with it for a while. And I felt that with Adolescence. I felt that with
Yeah.
Jamie, and I felt that with this episode specifically because when it ended, I was like, I cannot believe. I was like the psychologist who was, she's sitting there like,
Yeah.
oh my god, you know. Um,
Yeah.
she has to take a breather because she can't believe what she's experienced, and the performances were so special and so, like, I don't know how that kid did it, man. I kept thinking about him as a child in this. Like, what does he think? Like, the actor Owen. Um, what
Yeah.
does he think about all of the stuff that he's saying? And
Yeah.
he's like, because he's a kid, and I get worried. I get worried when child actors are really good in films because I'm like, how much of this are you imbibing? And like
Yeah.
he's tremendous. He's like a standout of the whole thing. So it concerns
Yeah.
me sometimes. I'm like, oh my god, you're
Yeah.
almost too good at this. And
Yeah.
I hope he's good as well. When we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something worth thinking about. But like, yeah, you've rightly said, like this show brings out, sometimes it's also important to bring out all the questions than actually give
Mm.
all the answers. And like, as we are kind of dealing with social media and the impact it has on our lives, the way we evaluate ourselves in the social media contexts, and then that trickles down into the choices, belief systems we end up having, the kind of person that we are becoming. I think it's
Yeah,
one of the most important, that fused with masculinity and how men are supposed to be. It's one of the most important and like kind of immediate shows and stories of our times, and which,
absolutely.
like, the cast and crew are doing a lot of interviews, and Stephen Graham is talking about that story of, how it takes a village to raise a kid. And also when something goes wrong, it is like, all of us are at fault. Like, all of us
Mm.
have a contribution, a share into like leading up to that moment. So it's high time we take accountability of it, and like kind of start taking steps, or like kind of start having conversations around this. So yeah, that's what this episode also was about. And if you find any piece, any like line of thought around this, if you want to share it with us, if you want us to kind of give it a platform, share it on our channels, we are happy to do that. Please share that. uh like, share, subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram pages, follow there. And we'll see you next week with another film, another character, and diving into that. Is that?
Yep.
Thank you so much.
See you
Bye.
then. Bye.
Yep.